to the fourth session of our Community Change webinar series. So far in this series, we've explored ideas around the art of disruption, the Opportunity Youth Collective Impact Initiative with the Aspen Forum for Community Solutions, and Breaking Silos with Severin Cullis Suzuki. Today's session is entitled Innovation Starts with People, with our special guests from Australia, Carolyn Curtis and Dr. Ingrid Burkett. My name is Liz Weaver, and I'm the Vice President and Director of the Learning Center here at the Tamarack Institute. I'm thrilled to be hosting today's webinar. As you may know, Australia and Canada share quite a bit in common. Australia has one of the highest levels of median wealth in the world, yet poverty and poor outcomes for certain groups are at an all-time high. Canada, with its vast economic and environmental wealth, is similarly stuck on moving the needle on poverty. Each year, both countries spend billions on social programs, yet very little changes. Prototyping and scaling possible solutions to the resilience and social prosperity gap is what the Australian Centre for Social Innovation is all about. TACSI, as it's known, its approach begins with learning from the people. Good innovation draws on people's real-life experiences at all stages to build solutions that work for them. The skills of listening and seeing things from others' perspectives are key to this way. TACSI shares much in common with the Tamarack Institute. Many of TACSI's core programs focus on family preservation, and their key action areas are families, aging, and disability. One of their signature initiatives is Family to Family, which you'll hear about a little later. It's a peer-to-peer program that draws on the experience and resilience within communities to help families grow and change together. It has dramatically improved family cohesion and is being scaled in 2 states currently with aspirations to become a national program. In this webinar, we'll be discussing with the TACSI approach to social innovation with their Chief Executive Officer, Carolyn Curtis, and with their Social Design Fellow, Dr. Ingrid Burkett. Carolyn and Ingrid will be visiting Canada in late September to share further their stories and to learn from Canadian innovators and organizations working on complex social challenges. I'd like to now take the time to introduce you to our speakers and welcome them, Carolyn Curtis and Dr. Ingrid Burkett. Carolyn is the CEO of the Australian Centre for Social Innovation, TACSI, one of Australia's most respected social enterprises focused on addressing challenging social issues. Carolyn leads TACSI's vision for systems that deliver real and sustainable social outcomes through working with people facing the challenges we are all trying to solve. Carolyn is a visionary and a hands-on leader of TACSI's dynamic, multidisciplinary team based in Adelaide, Sydney, and working all across Australia. She brings to TACSI over 15 years of experience at the front line and in management in the social sector, including as founding director of TACSI's Family by Family program, which won the NAPCAN, I'm sure we're going to hear more about that, the NAPCAN Award for Innovation and the Intentional Good Design Australia Award in Service Design. Carolyn's insights from a long career in child protection have laid the foundation for TACSI's approach to service and innovation. Her drive to ensure social innovation leads to better outcomes for children and families. Her passion and commitment has led TACSI to work on better outcomes in some of the most complex areas such as children and families, people with disabilities, and the aged. Carolyn is a sought-after speaker on social innovation and service design at conferences globally, and she regularly publishes in local and national media. Carolyn is also a tireless leader of social innovation beyond TACSI as the director of the Social Innovation Exchange, the world's leading social innovation network, and in leading a number of initiatives for better social outcomes nationally, and as a judge for the Good Design Australia Social Innovation Awards. Ingrid is the Director of Learning and Systems Innovation at the Australian Centre for Social Innovation. She's a social designer designing processes, products, and knowledge that deepen social impact and facilitate social innovation. She's contributed to the design of policies, processes in a diversity of fields, including community development, local economic development, disability, poverty reduction, procurement, and social investment. Ingrid is a past president and honorary ambassador of the International Association for Community Development and is committed to fostering an international dialogue about designing innovation methodologies for sustainable development. Ingrid also holds the position of Social Design Fellow at the Center for Social Impact at the University of New South Wales. Ingrid has worked in the community sector, government, and with the private sector and believes that each of these sectors has a valuable role to play in social innovation. Ingrid was previously Managing Director of Node, a social business focused on design for social innovation. She's also worked in social innovation and design positions in areas as diverse as community development, finance, and overseas development. Ingrid is also a practicing artist and graphic designer. Ingrid has qualifications in graphic design, social work, business, and community economic development. She has particular expertise in the design of economic processes and products and is recognized internationally for her work in community economic development and finance. Through these particular specialties, Ingrid has the skills to design processes, products, service, and knowledge in a wide range of fields and disciplines, and believes that the design of social innovation requires a capacity to think in creative, cross-disciplinary, and cross-sectoral ways. Wow, those are both very impressive biographies, and we're really pleased, Carolyn and Ingrid, that you're able to join us today.
Thanks, Liz.
So I'd like to oh, great. Thank you so much. We have to deal a little bit with the time delay in the conversation between Canada and Australia. I'd like to maybe begin with a couple of questions to start off our conversation, Carolyn and Ingrid. And the first question I have is really for you to describe the work of TACSI and also to share with our listeners some of the priority areas that you are currently working on.
Great. Well, TACSI really exists to develop, test and spread solutions for the people that need it most. And we do pay particular attention at TACSI with vulnerable population groups. I guess historically we really started off in a service design space. So you'll see on the slide there number 3 around developing solutions. And so we were really born in a place where we were developing, testing and scaling new service models and solutions. And we still definitely do that, but I think as Liz mentioned in the introduction, you know, we do have a growing inequality gap in Australia, and service models alone are not going to create the scale of change that really needs to happen in Australia. So there's kind of 4 big areas that we work in through really discovering insights and opportunities through working alongside people. You know, are we answering the right questions? Do we really understand the problem? Are we actually seeing the opportunities that are in front of us? Next, we really need to focus on building new and different capability. And TACSI alone certainly shouldn't and cannot solve all of these challenges alone. So we're really always looking for great partners and people with a keen appetite to practice good social innovation for outcomes and look at how we work with them to build new and different capabilities that are going to really drive outcomes for people. The third one is what I described at the beginning, which is what are new models and ways and approaches to supporting people, and not just in a professionalised sense, but how do we also tap into the resource and the wisdom and the lived experience of communities, of families, and how do we actually design and create and scale new approaches to supporting and enabling people to live great lives. And the last one is really saying, well, what happens if you do all of those things and it's still not enough? And this is really the systems change space. And in Australia, we're grappling with some really significant challenges you know, with children and families in child protection. We have an ageing population. You know, internationally, we're all grappling with climate change. Our Indigenous population in Australia has incredibly poor outcomes. And so solutions or service models alone are not going to be enough. So this is the systems change space for TACSI, and that can be from a place-based perspective, but also from a national perspective. You know, how do you actually take some of the great work that happens in a place-based scenario and scale that? So some of the areas we're really experimenting in at the moment, and Ingrid will talk about this a little more after, but in the child protection space, you know, we have inquiries and royal commissions year after year here, yet we're in a worse position than we've ever been in terms of child abuse and neglect in Australia. So what needs to change here? And it's something really significant that needs to change, and currently rearranging the existing system is not going to cut it. Just like our ageing population, you know, we really need to reimagine what good systems of support look like for our population as they age, and they're fundamentally different systems than what we have now. So how do we start to grapple with that now, imagine for that now, rather than wait till we reach the edge of the cliff? So these are kind of broadly the 4 areas that TACSI are playing in, but we're really, you know, at the heart of this organisation is about learning, and as we learn we evolve. So I'm sure that that over the years, and if you even visit our website in another 12 months, you'll see us evolving as we really learn through these areas of work.
Great. I wonder if you could just extrapolate a little bit more about your work with the folks. You talked about lived experience, so maybe share a little bit more about that, which I think is on your next slide.
Yeah, so I guess with, you know, we do fundamentally believe here that the best innovation comes from working alongside the very people you're there to serve. An interesting personal perspective, when I came to TACSI, I came straight out of a state government here, and I'm social work trained. And you know, at university, we're very much taught an assessment model, and asking questions and ticking boxes, and trying to understand where people sit within a system of categories. And when I started at TACSI, you know, I had a very strong frame of reference in an assessment model, but when I came here, was introduced to new methods around kind of more ethnographic approaches, and more spending time with people in a meaningful way to let them guide, I guess, the journey of their lives, rather than us going in with a pre-prescribed notion of the certain categories that their life can fit into. So starting with people for us looks like lots of different things, and it isn't a one-off activity. It's a fundamental part of our process from beginning to end. And it's about really understanding people's lives in a deep and meaningful way. It's around spending time in their context, in their homes, in their communities, in their schools, and really meeting them where they're at, rather than asking them to meet us where we're at. But this isn't only about the people whom we're there to serve. This is also about spending time with policymakers, with bureaucrats, with business, with philanthropy, to really understand, well, how do you actually construct a new solution, a new policy, a new system that's going to work for everyone? You know, I think we learnt some hard lessons in the early days where, you know, if you just design for your end user without really meaningfully engaging, you know, other actors within the system, it's really setting up failure from the start. So how do we actually meaningfully engage all actors to really design the best solution for outcomes?
And is there a particular kind of approach that you have when you're engaging the actors? Is there a set of questions or sub-questions that you have?
Ingrid, do you want to dive a little bit into our approach?
Sure. So I'll just put up this slide. Usually we start with a question, and it might be a are very broad questions. So in the work that we're doing looking at ageing with baby boomers, we've got an extraordinarily broad question, which is how might we ensure that all baby boomers have the opportunities to age well? That's a very, very broad question. So I guess part of the starting work is to explore with people what does it actually mean to age well in that instance. So we start with those questions, and then I guess we make the assumptions really, really clear. So that's our own assumptions, and also the assumptions that people generally bring to the table. So in the case of baby boomers, we might bring all sorts of assumptions about what baby boomers' lives are like. Different people within the system have their own. We like to make those really explicit, and we make those explicit partly by spending time with baby boomers to really challenge ourselves and challenge each other about what those assumptions might be. At the same time, we're learning from people in the context. So at TACSI, we often tend to focus on people who might be for whom the system may not be working. So in the case of baby boomers, maybe those baby boomers who are really struggling to access opportunities to age well. And we try and learn from those people in their own contexts. What are areas for them to age well, and what could possibly happen that could open up some opportunities for better aging well. And then finally, the approach is to learn through experimentation. So rather than just learning from talking with people, we have an approach that is based on learning through trying and testing and prototyping solutions with the people that we're working with. So in the case of baby boomers, if we have ideas or we find ideas through working with those the baby boomers, then we try and develop those and test them immediately so that we get feedback and we can learn through testing and try different things.
Really interesting. I know that one of the things that Carolyn said when she was describing the work of TACSI, she talked about designing solutions, and there were two areas of your work that I was interested in, the family by family work that we mentioned in the introductions and the Weaver's work. I wonder if you might be able to talk a little bit about those.
Sure. So these are new service models, and I think the interesting thing about both Family by Family and Weavers is they've both provided us with really great starting points and windows into the broader system. So in both our ageing strategy and children and family strategy, both have started off with the process of designing a new model, which has given us great insight and a window into the broader system. So Family by Family was the first model to come out of TACSI, and really what we're looking for here is families who have been through tough times, but they've come out the other side and they're doing well now, and we link them up with families that are struggling. And what we're really interested in is not just understanding or measuring how many friendships or connections are made. We're really interested in how behaviour changes as a result of that connection, and that's what we've been measuring. So Family by Family really speaks to the fact that professionalised services, yes, they're critical, they're fundamental, but they're not everything, and they're not the whole picture. There are a lot of people in Australia that don't have natural family support wrapped around them. They don't have neighbours that come and knock on their door and check on them. They don't have wide friendship circles. And I'm sure all of us listening to this webinar can really relate to how important family is to get us through the tough times in life. So when that doesn't exist naturally for people, how do we recreate that? And so Family by Family is really saying, look, let's use families as the workforce. Let's actually leverage great, rich resource that's already existing in our communities to help create better outcomes for those that are having some challenging times. So Family by Family is around its 6th year of operation. It's operating in 2 states in Australia. And the evaluations are really promising. So, you know, we are seeing that families who engage with Family by Family are interacting less with child protection services. But more importantly than that, we're seeing families that engage with the program achieving goals. We see them making new connections. We see them changing behaviour. We've seen a significant shift in families engaging in training and employment as a result of engaging with Family by Family. So we think that Family by Family is the beginning of a movement that really needs to happen in Australia, and that is that we do invest so much energy and effort into building a strong, structured, professionalised ecosystem for families here. But how do we start investing and building in families and communities and building resilient communities, investing in social capital, investing in families as the resource? And whilst Family by Family is, I guess, a model at this stage, we really do see it as the beginning of a movement. And what Family by Family enabled us to do is really get a good broad sense of what was happening in all the systems that children and families are interacting with, and that's what's led us to a much broader agenda in the child protection space, which Ingrid will talk a little bit more about. In terms of Weavers, Weavers is a response to really looking for what's happening for carers in Australia, and carers in Australia have some of the poorest outcomes of any population group. Many carers, and in fact over 50% of our carers here, suffer from quite extreme So Weavers, once again, is about leveraging resource and the wisdom and experience of those who have been through a caring journey. And really what we're trying to do here is find carers who have that rich lived experience that want to give back. And we connect them to people who are new to caring for a loved one. And through this relationship, there's really some key things that they're doing. They're helping the carer to navigate the system. Weavers help to really mobilise family and friends to wrap around the carer and the person they're caring for. They help them pay closer attention to their own health and their own well-being. And really importantly, they help them to think about grief and loss and what's happening for them, and also give them a sense of future and a sense of hope beyond, I guess, their time as a carer. So Weavers is in a really exciting place now with the evaluations telling us that there's significant improvements in carer mental health as a result of the model. We're seeing once again that increased connections are made, increased confidence in navigating the system, accessing new and different services that they weren't accessing before. But we're also seeing great outcomes for the volunteers, and even more excitingly, seeing great outcomes for the people that they're caring for. So I think, you know, what we did want to achieve here is making sure that we were able to create outcomes across all the layers and the actors involved in the model, and that certainly seems to be happening. And once again, through working with our wonderful volunteer weavers and carers, it's given us a really rich insight and window into the broader system of ageing and caring in Australia, and we saw huge potential and have really grabbed hold of that, and that's really what's led us to our Innovation Age agenda at TACSI.
So Ingrid, do you want to just quickly tell us about the Families and Child Protection initiative that TACSI has going on?
Sure. So as Carolyn said, solutions is one thing, and you know, Family by Family and Weavers have had successful outcomes in addressing those core issues. But at TACSI, we're also interested in Yes, we can produce lots of solutions at grassroots level. We can make sure that solutions deliver for people who are with lived experience of those issues. But what about the systems level? And by systems, I guess we're talking about not just the policy environment, but also all of the services that deliver programs to families, and how all of those outcomes can be joined up together to help families thrive. So in Australia, we have, I guess, a culture of trying to work out what services create better outcomes. But I guess what we've been lacking is that systemic approach to innovation, to have a look at what in the system is actually creating barriers that prevent families from thriving, and what can we do about that. So we've had multiple reviews, reform agendas, royal commissions and inquiries into child protection in particular, but we still haven't managed to crack what will it take to actually enable families to thrive across the country, and particularly families who are struggling, I guess, with multiple issues. So families, Indigenous families, Aboriginal families, families who are living on low incomes and struggling financially, families who are living with disability and in caring positions. So I guess this work is taking it our issues that we've learned and our learnings from families up into the systems level to ask what can happen at a systems level that can help to shift the dial on some of those issues. So we'd love to say that, we've had approaches from across the country to say, please come and help us redesign the whole system. That's not usually the way systems innovation happens, but what we have done is managed to do a range of work across the country that not only helps us learn, but helps our partners learn what are the barriers and the opportunities at that systems level. So we've just got a list here on this slide of different programs where we're looking, for example, in New South Wales about rethinking the whole restoration process of how do children who have been in out-of-home care actually get reconnected into their families. What would it take to shift some of those outcomes, because a lot of children in out-of-home care have very poor outcomes. Or in other jurisdictions like Queensland, looking at what will it take to shift from a reform agenda inside government where again responding to crisis and another Royal Commission into a transformation cycle where we can actually start to shift those outcomes, particularly in Aboriginal families. So yeah, it's at a different level. And Carolyn, you've been very involved in this work as well. Is there anything you want to add to that?
No, I guess just to say that I think we're so risk adverse when it comes to working in child protection or working with children, and often you will hear that innovation is just too risky when it comes to working with society's most vulnerable. But I think, to be quite honest, we're at a point in Australia now where almost 1 in 4 children are reported for child abuse and neglect by the age of 15. We're really at a point where it's too risky not to try something different and not to innovate. So we're at the beginning of this journey, but we've got some great I guess partners interested in really thinking from a place-based level through to what happens in families, through to what happens actually within communities and society and the media. How do we actually start to crack out of thinking about child protection and thinking about what do our children and families need to live great lives, and how do we force ourselves to think and look through different lenses and in different frames in really reimagining what this needs to look like, because operating on a, I guess, in a system that was built in the 1960s is just not going to cut it, and I think we're seeing that. We just need to get brave enough now to do something about it, and that's really what TACSI is trying to make happen.
Great. I think that gives us a good illustration of some of the areas that you're working in. Carolyn, you mentioned this notion of an innovation age. Perhaps you could share that, share kind of TACSI's approach to really thinking through innovation, this idea of innovation age.
Sure. So this started, like I said, we spent some time developing this solution, Weavers. We were getting great traction, seeing some great outcomes with that, but we also saw so much more potential, but so much more need, particularly when thinking about our ageing population. So the innovation age was really born out of a great first conversation with a particularly forward-thinking, open foundation in Australia. And it's a foundation called Equity Trustees, and they have a particular family part of that foundation called the Wicking Trust. And I think the Wicking Trust were saying to themselves, wow, we spend lots of money every year on new programs or you know, new beds or you know, very local grassroots initiatives, but we just don't feel like, well, we feel like we could be doing more with our money. We feel like we could be driving bigger impact. So they reframed their foundation strategy around systems change. And TACSI were really the first cab off the rank for them. And I said, well, look, I certainly don't have the solution for what a new system in ageing looks like for our ageing population, but what I do have is an evidence-based process and approach to innovation that we can apply to this challenge. And so we entered into a great partnership with this foundation, and it's been just a brilliant experience. And so we started very broad with that question that Ingrid mentioned earlier, which is, you know, what will it take for all of our baby boomers to age well, not just those that can afford it. And so we spent time in homes, on street corners, caravan parks, cafes, all across Australia, really wanting to understand from people, what does ageing well look like for you? And I think the important aspect here, and what I really appreciated about what Ingrid and the team did, was they weren't just mapping what people were concerned about, what people were fearful of, or what people were vulnerable to, but they were also mapping the resilience factors. They were mapping the opportunities. So we could really start to present to Australia a more balanced view of, yes, challenges, but also opportunities. So one of the things that really shone through in all of the conversations we had was we'd explore the different domains of life, but the one thing people really struggled to get past was this sense of home, and what will my home look like? Where will my home be as I age? And I feel deeply concerned about that. And I think in Australia, you know, people either suffer in silence at home or they go into a residential care facility, and I think we've got much more scope to think far more creatively around how to innovate, create a sense of home for people as they age, and also how do we really push the bounds of policy when it comes to home and housing in Australia, and how do we actually build policy that enables people to age well at home in a place where they have connections, where they have, you know, where they have their identity, where they have their networks, and all those things that matter. The other thing we really learnt is, and I'm sure this will be very similar for our friends in Canada, is that there were a lot of people, you know, talking about innovation or wanting to add value or wanting to really, I guess, get on the front foot when it comes to our ageing population. But these things were very disparate, not connected up, not having conversations. So TACSI are at the beginning of really resourcing, investing and designing in a collective innovation model. And to start with, we've just been going around the country and facilitating conversations with all of those who really see themselves innovating in the ageing well space at the moment. And I think the thing that's really emerging here is, you know, we have stumbled across pockets I say pockets of greatness, so pockets of great innovation across the country and across the world where you really do see better outcomes for people, and there is huge potential. But sometimes these pockets of innovation have remained pockets for 10 years. And how do we actually push through this? How do we think more creatively around business models? How do we think more creatively around partnerships and collaboration? So what we're really interested in is what can we build and design for the system of ageing to really help scale impact and really help scale outcomes. And this is something that we think we really need to invest in here to really, I guess, paint a new future for our ageing population. So we're at the beginning of this journey, but it's a very rich journey, and a journey that's been made possible by a very forward-thinking foundation here in Australia.
Wow, it sounds very, very innovative, and I think we'll, from the lens of Canada, be watching how it all evolves. I know that we have a very short period of time left, and I wondered if you could maybe share a little bit of your future vision. We have about 10 minutes left on the webinar, so maybe take us through some of your future vision for TACSI and how you see the pieces of your work fit together.
Yeah, so I think with TACSI, I think the future for TACSI and the key for TACSI is to think bigger than TACSI, if that makes sense. And, you know, when it comes to social innovation in Australia, you know, the ecosystem is very, very immature. You know, we still have a real challenge in moving beyond the rhetoric and moving towards outcomes here. So I think TACSI needs to continue to really rest in the doing. TACSI needs to keep doing great social innovation with partners to leverage better outcomes for the people we serve. We need to keep really tackling things at a local level, at a place-based level, but also at more of a macro systems level. But I think that the key for us is we also need to play a leadership role in growing the market in Australia. And growing the market, because I think that we can't keep just going around the same circles with some of these social policy challenges. We really need to get bold and challenge ourselves on a different level if we want to see different outcomes for our Indigenous population, if we want to see different outcomes for our carers, if we want to see different and better outcomes for our children and families. So how do we grow the social innovation market in Australia so we can in fact become bold and build new evidence that drives better outcomes? And then the third component in terms of my bigger vision for TACSI is then how do you build capability to service that market, and how do you build capability that, like I said, moves beyond the rhetoric of social innovation and co-design and actually embeds itself in outcomes and staying accountable to really building better outcomes for people. So yeah, I guess it's a three stage process for me over the next 5 years for TACSI, which is really looking at let's keep doing and learning, let's build the market, but let's build the right capabilities to service that market so we can build a more mature ecosystem of social innovation in Australia.
Great. I know that one of the slides that you have in your slide deck, which I find very interesting, is the innovation process that you use with TACSI. And so I wonder, either Carolyn or Ingrid, if you could maybe talk a little bit about that in the kind of last couple of minutes that we have together, just how you approach innovation in Australia, and that how this process has informed some of your work and maybe some of the lessons that you've learned.
Sure, I might start with that. So I guess we've covered some of this over what we've been talking about, and in TACSI what we try and do is really unpack what the unknowns are at first. So we start with periods of discovery, and Carolyn's mentioned some of those periods of discovery that we've had across all of our work. We're trying in that part of the work really to unpack what is the opportunity. We spend a lot of time with people at all parts of the system during that time, so people with lived experience, but also trying to unpack and discover what is it like for frontline workers, for example, who are often, I guess, managed in that process, but may actually hold the key to unlock what it takes to build better outcomes. Then the designing part is about what are the solutions, and we talked earlier about, I guess, testing and prototyping different solutions, and that's the essence of the designing part, trying to unpack what does actually work and experiment and test and learn with people with lived experience and other parts of the system where it will make or break, I guess, the solution. Once we've spent considerable time with those unknowns, we get to know a bit more about what works, and we can move into that trialing space. So what works if we grow the testing prototypes and trial them in different contexts or at larger scale. So I guess that's where, some of the things that we're more familiar with start to happen. So how do we grow? How do we expand? How do we test in different contexts? And then how do we spread that solution once we have understood what it takes to actually build those solutions over time and space? So, I think what we bring at TACSI is a real discipline and an intention to explore and discover and define, and we call this the generative research phase, where we spend time with people and really get to know what's happening in people's lives, what's happening in the system, and then link that to what we call a developmental design phase, where we're developing those solutions, testing them, and then exploring how we can replicate or trial or spread those solutions. So yeah, that's a very short introduction to the sorts of innovation work that we do.
And it's interesting to me that you are also really invested in this co-design idea, that you really are thinking about working with the folks that are impacted. And we've heard that through the Weavers example, through the family by family example. So can you talk maybe a minute about the co-design elements of your work?
Sure. So, I mean, just a very quick, I guess, definition of co-design. It's really about collaborating, including and designing with the people who use, but not just using the service, but actually delivering or engaging with the service or product. So we see it as, involving consumers or clients, but also staff and funders. And with the idea that innovation often depends on a diversity of perspectives. No one has just the right answer, and so we often hear about, top-down is not the way to go, and that we, should move to bottom-up. I guess what we're saying with a co-design approach is, what would happen if we worked side by side across those different people and perspectives? What could we change if we understood what each other's perspectives were and we could co-create solutions?
Great. I wonder if we could move to slide 25 now, Ingrid. I know that both you and Carolyn are traveling to Canada, as we mentioned in the introduction, later in September and early October. And so I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about your trip to Canada, and where you'll be over the course of the next couple of days, or the next that trip that you're coming to. And just a little bit of what you're hoping for what are some of the outcomes that you're hoping for during that trip?
Sure. Well, I'll start, and Ingrid, you can feel free to chip in as well. So we have a incredibly ambitious 10 or so days coming up in Canada, and we're going to be everywhere from what I can understand. So we're going to Vancouver, Toronto, Edmonton, and a number of other places, and we're spending time with government, with other innovation labs, with funders, with policy people, and really looking at what we can both learn and share. And like you raised at the very beginning, Liz, you know, there are such similarities and similar challenges and opportunities between Australia and Canada. So how do we really capitalise on that? How do we invest more in learning and sharing as countries in the social innovation space? So we have a very big 10 days planned, and are really excited and grateful to Social Innovation Generation for making this happen.
Ingrid, are you looking forward to your travels to Canada?
Absolutely. I have spent a little bit of time in Canada, but this will give me a bit of a perspective on, I guess, what's happening in terms of social innovation. I know that you're all doing some fabulous work both at a place-based level, but also very interested in the labs work that's happening, the social labs work. So yeah, it should be a fabulous mutual learning experience.
Well, we're looking very forward to having you here in Canada as well. For the folks that are listening in on this webinar, you'll be able to find more information about Carolyn and Ingrid's visit to Canada at the Social Innovation Generation website, and in our email to you, we will send you a link. So if you are in one of the cities that Carolyn and Ingrid will be visiting, please do plan to attend one of their sessions, and you can learn more about the work of TACSI and some of the ways that they're thinking about social innovation, and also some of the lessons that they're learning as they dive deep in Australia with communities trying to really think about and scale social change. I found this to be a really, really fascinating conversation, and I want to thank you so much, Carolyn and Ingrid, for sharing your insights and your perspectives today, and for joining us on this call. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank our supporters at Tamarack, Human Resources and Social Development Canada, the Maytree Foundation, the J.W. McConnell Family Foundation, and the Province of Ontario. But particularly, I'd like to thank our colleagues at Social Innovation Generation for connecting us with Carolyn and Ingrid, and for making this call happen. And shout out to Geraldine for all of her support on this. We want to just do a couple of reminders before we wrap up the call. For those of you that are members of Tamarack, you know about our award-winning newsletter, Engage, but for those of you that are new to us, we want to remind you to sign up for Engage. It's an online magazine that's published monthly. Our promise to you is we'll provide you with the latest thinking through articles, news, resources for those of you that are engaged in community change work. And so please feel free to sign up for Engage. We would like to invite you to join us for the next session in our Community Change webinar series. During this session entitled The Dynamics of Social Change, Sylvia Chu and Dr. Frances Wesley will discuss the dynamics of social change, the roles of leaders in driving change forward, and new approaches that are integral to the change process. We're also really pleased to have Dr. Wesley join us at the collective, the Community Change Institute that will be happening at the end of September. You can also join us for our last session, webinar session in our Community Change webinar series, which will be happening on September 12th. During that session entitled Collective Impact 3.0, I'll be chatting with Mark Cabage, and we'll be sharing our insights about the evolution of collective impact. And we'll be talking a lot about what it takes to get to transformative community change, Mark and I have just written a paper called Collective Impact 3.0, and for those of you that sign up, you'll be able to read the paper, and we'll dive a little bit deeper into our thoughts around this. The Tamarack team would also like to personally invite you to join us at the inaugural Community Change Institute, which is taking place in the vibrant city of Toronto in the fall from September 26th to 30th. This 5-day event will feature 4 renowned speakers, including Steve Patrick, 40 workshops, and over 250 change makers from across the globe. We have some folks coming from Australia as well and from New Zealand, so we're excited about that. Details about this incredible learning opportunity can be found on the events section of our website. We like to think about this as 5 days and 5 big ideas, so please feel free to join us, and we'd love to have you join us. Finally, we'd love to hear from you, so please do send us your feedback to Tamarack at tamarackcommunity.ca. And then finally, I'd like to thank Carolyn and Ingrid for joining us all the way from Australia, where it's early in the morning for you. And for those of you that have signed in and are listening to this webinar, thanks so much for your time. We hope that this conversation has raised some ideas for you and some practical examples that you can follow up. And feel free to join Carolyn and Ingrid if she's in your community or when she's in your community later in the year. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.